Some towns don't vanish in fire or flood. They fade, swallowed piece by piece by the night. The sea creeps closer, the lights burn out one by one, and the people who stay behind start to forget what living with hope ever felt like. Welcome back, Nightmares and Ghouls. I'm Yashi. Thank you for joining me once again in my dim corner of the internet, where unsettling stories are told while I color. Every tale told here is shared with author's permission, and their link can be found in the description below. Tonight's story comes from Reddit user the Kyle Kurtz. Tonight, we drift through Bodomlo Bay, an island where the water is thick with secrets and the air tastes like something long dead. One man calls it the empty. Maybe it started with a single quiet death no one dared to speak about, or maybe it began the moment the island forgot how to hope. Either way, get yourself a drink, a snack, a warm blanket, and let's sink into the story together. This is The Empty by the Kyle Kurtz. It's hard not to feel like every day is exactly the same. Every day I wake up, I eventually find myself at work, gutting an endless line of fish who were too slow or too stupid to escape the capture of the nets. I eat something I can't really taste. Then, water falls from the sky, drenching the pavement of Bodomlo Bay, which always soaks through my clothes and chills me down to my bones as I walk home. There, I add something to the board. Some nights, I see Jenny, and I sleep. But that isn't really true, is it? Every day isn't exactly the same. Every day, it actually gets a little bit worse. The nights seem to bleed into the ever-gray sky a little bit further. There are fewer lights on in the houses as I make my wet trek home at night. The shelves in the only market in town are a little more empty. The Empty. I wrote it on a sticky note and pinned it to the top of my corkboard so it wouldn't fall off, along with hastily cut news articles from the Clarion, Bodomlo Bay's sole newspaper. The one I applied for 3 times now, but only ever found silence as my answer. The Bay, as locals called it, was never what someone would call a happy place, but there was a certain comfort in its slow pace. Unfortunately, that comfortable pace had ground to a standstill about 6 months ago. It started with the families. A few couples with young children just packed their bags and left without a word. Then, Danny Boyle, one of the only 2 electricians in the Bay, hung himself from a light pole in the midday sun. Dozens of people walked by before anyone took notice of his swaying corpse, and then when they did, he was as gray as the sky, pressing down on us. I began collecting stories, newspaper clippings, anything that stuck out. I don't know why I called it The Empty. It just popped into my mind one day and began gnawing through my thoughts until I set it free on this project that consumes half a wall in my small 1-room apartment. I know Jenny hates the board, but she won't say it. She always changes the subject when I bring up what's been going on in the Bay, and when her emerald eyes happen across the board, they quickly snap away, as someone does when they walk in on someone before they're decent. The kind of interactions 2 people dating for 2 years with no plans to ever go further have when they've reached an impasse. That's why tonight, when I got home, still dripping from the nightly drizzle, I was surprised to see her standing in front of the board. But something had changed. All of the articles and notes I had made were gone from the sawdust-colored corkboard strewn about on the linoleum floor. The final sticky note remained, adorned with the title I'd given it. I watched with a furrowed brow as her hand reached up and plucked the final clear thumbtack off the board. The sticky note remained defiantly in place. She turned around to face me and smiled. Blood dribbled down her chin, her teeth stained with pulsing waves of red. I watched in horror as she croaked out something akin to words before finding herself and sputtering out, "I feel so full now." As she brought the final thumbtack to her lips, I stepped forward, gently taking her by the wrist. I couldn't help but let a shattered scream slip from my lips as blood erupted from her mouth, splattering across my thin jacket and the articles and notes littering the floor. Without another word, she collapsed. I ran to the phone and called the police, but only after 3 tries did an operator finally answer. The voice on the other end flatly told me someone was on their way, over my stammering explanation, before a cold click emanated from the line. I turned back to Jenny to find the final sticky note slip off the board, floating down to rest on her still chest. Dark blood infiltrated the yellow scrap of paper, drifting across the hastily scribbled words. The empty. I don't know how, but the catches have been bigger than what we've been shipping out for the last 6 months. My boss's voice droned on, barely a tremor of annoyance tinging his tone, despite the seriousness of the theft. When you take from the plant, you don't just hurt me, but everyone else here. I can only manage to account for so much. His voice drifted off, its sound undulating through the air like waves lapping the shore. My mind wasn't on work, or who was stealing the fish. I was trapped in that moment with Jenny, watching her blood crawl through the months of work as her body slowly grew colder in my arms with every passing second. The paramedic from Hospital Island finally arrived just to whisk her away on a gurney. The sheriff was there, a silent, grim presence presiding over the scene. No one said a word to me. All I got was a simple, slow nod from the lawman who had seen too many deaths in the last few months to have anything else to offer. Then I was alone, watching the blood begin to crust over the old newspaper clippings and hastily scrawled notes. I spent the night mopping the floor of my apartment. The tiny single unit suddenly felt so large, so vast, and so bare. When I went to open the front door to my abode so I could release the bucket filled with a violent mix of blood and pine sol, my heart raced when the doorknob wouldn't budge. I tore at the brass cylinder, feeling a mix of dread and revulsion wash over me as the one thing I needed most in the world was to be out of this room, haunted with blood and silence. I felt the room sway around me, all the lights seeming to dim and my vision zeroed in on the immobile force before me. And then the door opened. I emptied the bucket a few feet away in the ditch. Something about it all felt so sickeningly normal now. My thoughts were again snatched away from the moment within a moment when something across the factory floor shifted. In the corner of the room, where the pale lights struggled in vain to reach, I saw something. I realized my boss had also taken note, his bloodshot eyes locked in place at what I had noticed, before we both just trailed away to the floor. He took in a deep, huffing breath and concluded with, "So, you all know what's at stake. That's all I've got. Let's get back to it, boys." Near the end of my shift, I hesitated outside his office door, with a hand raw from a long day of gutting fish, before eventually rapping 3 times on the door. I heard a grunt from within and let myself in. "Hey, sir. Sorry to bother you. I just had a question. Before, when you were talking to us, did you see something?" The man's grizzled brow furrowed for a moment before his gaze seemed to grow slack. He gently shook his head and launched into telling me his story. My family have fished as far back as anyone can tell. My father built this plant when he realized just selling fish to the bay wouldn't keep the lights on. I remained silent, simply listening as he took in a long, shuddering breath and went on. "But it just isn't enough anymore. They want more for less. More. And the bay, it just seems to be getting emptier every year. Sometimes I find myself envying the damn fish. All they have to do is sit and rest." I'm so sorry, sir." He glanced up, seeming almost surprised by my presence. The man rubbed a hand over his weathered brow as if to shake off the malice. "Never you mind, son. It'll be fine. We both have work that needs to be doing." And with that, I found another day over. I spent the night mopping a clean floor, sleep evading me as the smell of blood crawled through the heavy pine scent in the air every time I laid down. Eventually, I pulled out a notebook and wrote, logging everything I could recall, about what had littered my board just the night before. The next day, nobody saw our boss at the plant, despite his old pickup being parked outside. We all worked in silence for a time, stabbing the day's harvest and tearing anything untoward out before lopping heads off and throwing cuts of fish on the conveyor belt. In time, I realized enough had gathered for a trip to the walk-in freezer for storage. When no one else seemed to take note, I sighed and pulled my gloves off before pushing the creaking cart filled with death towards the enormous steel doors. I opened the door and froze, but only in a metaphorical sense. Before me, my boss sat in his office chair. Icicles had formed on his face, and a thin white powder had settled on him from the rattling unit puttering away overhead. He sat with what remained of his livelihood, as still as the surrounding fish, with a soft, contented smile on his face. His eyes remained eternally open, locked on a row of shelves that made up the walls of small corpses, all perfectly preserved around him. No scream came from my lips this time. I just walked to his office and made the call, looking at the vacant space where his chair had once been, while the line rang and rang and rang. Days drifted by. I felt myself moving around the world, making food, mopping the already spotless floor. Then one day, a static hum began to build behind my eyes, and I realized I hadn't been taking my meds since Jenny. I found the bottle in the cabinet behind the mirror and opened the container to find 3 pills left inside. I downed one quickly, wincing at the water that tasted like it was forced through stone to reach my lips. I knew I needed to go see Doc and get some more. As I approached the door to my minuscule manor, I slowed to a stop. My eyes growing wide at the sight of the simple stainless steel door with nothing affixed on my end waiting for me. A crash of thunder tore through the ship, and a wave rocked me off my feet to the floor, wrists screaming as they slammed hard into the metal floor of my cell. Darkness bellowed through the small enclosure, the only source of light a pale yellow glowing drifting through the 3 small slits in my door. Head in my aching hands, I began to repeat the one phrase that had helped me before, over and over again, until I felt the world had stopped shifting from behind my eyes and I could sense the warm glow of my apartment's lights return. I wasn't there anymore. I wasn't trapped in that empty coffin of a room meant for disobedient sailors. That cage was a decade behind me now. I eventually found myself walking through the glass doors to Doc's small family clinic. The man looked up at me from his desk and gave me that practiced smile of a professional man, a semblance of warmth that put his patients at ease. When I told him I was running out of my meds, he tutted at me and unlocked a drawer in the cabinet behind his desk and produced a brown paper bag. With a glance inside, he offered it my way and warned, "You're lucky I special order this every time you come in, or you'd be as the well. I know most big cities carry the stuff, but our humble little pharmacy barely knew the name when I asked." I looked up from the medication and nodded at the man. "Thanks, Doc. I'll try and remember to call in advance when it's getting low." A stilted silence fell over the room as the man seemed unsure of what to follow up with. Most of his patients had twisted ankles or a bad back, not this. I broke through and I asked, "I was wondering if you could tell me anything about the families with the kids that up and left. I've been looking into what's been going on lately." His usual automatic demeanor shifted, and the man tilted his head slightly before asking, "What's been going on lately?" All the deaths, Doc?" His eyebrows shot up, and he took in a small inhale. His voice seemed surprised as he recalled, "Oh, yes. There has been more than normal." When I paused, waiting for an answer to my question, he shifted uncomfortably, toying with his purple and green striped tie before deflecting. "I can't share patient information, same as if anyone came in asking what meds I'd give to who, and I never." I nodded at this, preparing to leave when Doc quietly remarked, "My office has been so empty lately." I looked to him before opening the door, finding the man oblivious to me now, lost in his own sea of thoughts. With a half-hearted thank you, I let myself out. They found him in the bathtub, still dressed, face down. He was just a kid. The air between the head of the local newspaper, the Clarion, and his only editor was thick with wisps of smoke from an eternally lit cigarette in his hand. He studied me from behind the thin, square-framed glasses that his nose barely seemed to support. I kept my composure, and he went on. A few days later, another couple found their kid trying the same thing. They got to them in time, but it wasn't long until every family in the Bay skedaddled inland, away from... As the editor trailed off, I couldn't help but press. Away from what? His eyes snapped back to me, clarity I had grown unused to, piercing through the invisible fog that had seemed to suffocate the bay. He simply replied, "I don't know, kid, and my best guy has been missing for days. Doesn't take an investigator to guess. I want you to look into it." I sat back, watching him take a long drag of the smoldering cigarette in his grasp. Why me? I've applied before. You didn't seem interested in me then. Couldn't afford any more staff at the time. Honestly, probably can't afford you now. But when people see me, they clam up. They know I'm always asking questions. You already know all I know now. Maybe you can crack it. He dropped the dying butt into an overflowing ceramic ashtray and drew out another cigarette. With a flick of a worn Zippo adorned with the logo for the 82nd Airborne, he brought it to life. An endless cycle of wasting away. I nodded and stood, pausing before exiting the office. I turned back and asked, "Why are you different? Most people here, they can't seem to even realize what's happening." The editor flashed a yellowed grin my way and plucked the brown paper bag filled with meds off his table. He extended them my way and replied, "I don't know. We might have more in common than you think. Maybe the questions keep moving us forward." I looked down, feeling ashamed as I gently snatched the valuable bag from my new employer. As I made my way out, I heard him shout after me, "Why not try the law, man? Maybe he'll give you something." He was sitting on the sidewalk, outside the Bay's premier police station, revolver in his hand. The sheriff took no notice of me as I approached, his dark gaze seemingly fixed on the weapon resting in his hand, gently gleaming in the cloudy midday light. "Are you okay?" I asked, my stride crumbling to a slow shuffle as I grew closer to the man. I noticed his shirt looked wrinkled, with old stains on the normally well-pressed collar and under his arms. He jerked like a man shaken from a deep, dreamless sleep and looked up at me. He made a sound akin to a positive assurance, but his eyes eventually drifted back down to the revolver. He lamely said, "Sorry, son. Didn't mean to worry you. It's empty. I just have to make sure it's clean." "For what?" The sheriff looked up, words uncertain as he stated simply, "For when I need it." I didn't know what to say. Instead, I shifted to the reason I'd come this way to begin with. What's going on around here? What's happening to the Bay? The man's eyes fell somewhere else, between me and the thoughts that kept the revolver in his hand in the middle of the day. He told me, it's ending. Like us, it was born, it lived, and it will die. Not if, but when. Nothing lasts forever. Before I had a chance to ask, I noticed Doc passing by, his hands slack at his sides. He moved like an infant, finding its first steps, a wobbling, unsteady motion. He walked right past us, both, without a word, towards the beach. I felt myself following the good doctor out to the sea. I thought about asking him what he was doing, but no sound came. My lips stubbornly refused to comply. With every step, the evening light cast over the bay faded. In time, I was encased in darkness until a small hint of light flickered through to find me, through 3 small slits and the door to my cell. The cell they'd thrown me in, for my safety, at least until we got back to shore. I still felt my body continue to move as I threw myself against the door of the brig, screaming for help, knowing no one would disobey orders to come and save me. Ahead, the doctor joined at least a dozen bodies on the shore. Some were bloated with rotten seawater, clearly cast away for days. Others looked like their last breaths had been mere moments ago. The doctor walked out into the water until the white wisps of hair on his head were swallowed by the sea. I fell to my knees in the small prison on a ship in the endless sea, with my head in my hands. I began to recite the mantra an old senior chief once said to me on fire guard, the words that resonated more than he could have ever expected. The usefulness of a cup is that it is empty. The emptiness is an opportunity. Like this empty, desolate room they had thrown me in, anything could fill it. I knew that once we made it back to shore, they would already have my discharge paperwork ready. Nobody wants to answer for what I almost did. I felt the seawater splash against my knees as my body continued heeding the call of the void. My emptiness is not a curse. Something can be valuable because it is empty. I could do anything, fill it with anything. I stopped. The small cell around me was gone, replaced by a sunset beach, littered with bodies. It occurred to me then I had seen something 6 months ago. Something that wasn't right. I had seen it slip right past me at work. I turned, gaze falling upon the processing plant. The littered corpses of fish were the breadcrumbs I followed as I descended into the plant's basement. The darkness pressed in from every direction, finally receding as my eyes adjusted to the minute hints of light drifting through the factory's unused cellar. The smell of saltwater hit me, the ocean's smell forcing its way through the decade-old foundation in cracks that threatened to one day swallow the building whole. Brine splashed beneath my boots as I made my way deeper towards the corner of the room. And there it sat. My sight seemed to falter as I took it in, gray and small, a human head on mandibles and trundles that my mind didn't want to accept. I'd seen it 6 months ago, sliding from a catch net, scurrying across the floor. Like everyone else in the room, I couldn't remember what it was I was seeing, until now. Twin black eyes stared up at me, and the digits making up its maw seemed to pulsate as I felt something wriggle its way into my mind. You different. I spoke, unsure of if it could understand, as I asked the entity, "Why did you do this?" Its eyes seemed to blink, folds rising from the bottom of its eyes flickering up before receding. It answered wordlessly, "Be empty." A small 3-digit hand gently gestured towards the room. "Crying for help. No answer." I looked around the room, feeling the cool air on my skin. I next asked, "Why not just go home?" Hurt. May die out there. You'll die if you stay here." It remained still, and I felt the world beneath my feet shift as another wave tore through reality. Before the door to the brig could find me, I began repeating my mantra to myself until the feeling began to fade. I felt it watching me, listening to my every thought. "I can't go with you, but I can help you start." After a long pause, 2 small hands extended towards me, weakly. The town was silent as I made my way from the factory with the entity in my arms. I was surprised to find its gray, wet-looking skin was warm to the touch. Its black eyes stared up at me until we reached the edge of the shore. The water was empty, the wreckage of the people of the town having washed away. As I slid the helpless being into the water, its gray skin seemed to shimmer. The remaining trundles that hadn't been torn away by netting gracefully danced in the water. I watched it gradually drift away, turning one last time to observe me waiting, and then it was gone. I remained at the beach, feeling the waves gently lap at my knees. The sun began to peek out over the horizon. Pink rays rippling across the ocean surface, not unlike the morning I'd stood on the edge of my ship. but decided to ask for help. The day I'd been thrown into the brig for the crime of needing help. Eventually, though, everyone needs help. I felt a small smile creep across my face. The emptiness can be filled, but some voids don't want to be healed. They whisper instead. They call you by name. Thank you for joining me tonight, nightmares, and for walking through Bodomlo Bay's hollow streets by my side. If tonight's story lingered in your chest for a little bit too long, or if you've been feeling your own kind of empty, please know you're not alone. It's okay to reach out. You can call or text the Crisis Lifeline anytime at 988 in the US. Sometimes surviving the darkness starts with a single voice on the other end of the line. If you would like me to be the voice for one of your twisted tales, please feel free to reach out on my Discord, linked below. Don't forget to show love to tonight's author, V. Kyle Kurtz, on Reddit. His profile is also linked below. Until next time, keep your lights low, your heart steady, and don't ever forget, the emptiness can be filled again. Until next time, ghouls, stay spooky.